started on today's notes over classifying pairs of lines and angles. We're going to be going over a lot of vocabulary today, and then we're going to do some examples together where we identify all of these different vocabulary terms. The first thing I want you to look at, I want you to direct your eyes to the image on the left. That's a rectangular prism. It's got a lot of stuff on it. It's important to note that these arrows that are here, they're kind of in purple, they're used to show parallel lines. So lines that have the same number of arrows are parallel. So example, these two lines are parallel. They each have one arrow. These lines right here each have two arrows. All of those lines are parallel. And if at any point in the video you need to pause the video and write what I've written down, go ahead and do that. I'm going to go through this very quickly so it's not like a super long video. So first, let's identify, or we're going to define and identify parallel lines. Parallel lines are coplanar and do not intersect. The symbol looks like two L's next to each other. So line CD and line EF are parallel to each other. So I would read what I wrote with symbols. Line CD is parallel to line EF. So there's an example of parallel lines on this figure that we're given. Perpendicular lines intersect at 90-degree angles. And I want to remind you that if ever you see this like little box in the corner of where two lines meet, that lets you know that is a 90-degree angle right there. So perpendicular lines intersect at 90-degree angles. The symbol is an upside down capital T. And I could say that line AB is perpendicular to line AD. Skew lines. Skew are not coplanar, not parallel, and do not intersect. So an example of skew lines would be line GH and line DF are skew. And you can see that line DF is over here in this plane, line GH is in this plane. They're not parallel, they will not intersect. Now let's look at parallel planes. Parallel planes are planes that do not intersect. So an example of that would be plane ABC is parallel to plane EFG. And remember, when I'm naming a plane, I just need 3 points on the plane and they can be written in any order. So this plane up here, ABC, I could have called it ACB or CDA. I just need 3 points to name that plane. So now let's go over here to the right side of the page where we're looking at vocabulary when we're classifying pairs of angles. So in looking at this image, I've got two lines, M, N, and then I've got line T, and obviously it intersects line M and N. And I've got all these numbers indicating that there are 8 angles that are formed. So let's talk about the first vocabulary term, a transversal. A transversal is a line that intersects two coplanar lines at 2 different points. In the figure, the transversal T and lines M and N form 8 angles. So here I have M and N. My transversal is a line that intersects those 2 lines, and we've created 8 angles. What I want you to note is that every single angle is on line T. Not every angle is on line M and N. It's important to remember that. So now let's talk about, and actually before I go on to the next vocabulary terms, I want to talk about this transversal. When it intersects those 2 lines, it's got basically what's outside of those 2 lines along the transversal, and what's inside those 2 lines along the transversal. Along meaning like, that transversal is my road, right? Here's the outside, here's the outside, here's the inside. We call that the exterior and the interior. Exterior angles are angles that are formed on the outside of those 2 lines along the transversal. Interior angles are angles that are formed inside, in between those 2 lines along the transversal. So now looking at that, let's move on to corresponding angles. corresponding angles lie on the same side of the transversal and the same sides of M and N. Angle 2 and angle 6 are corresponding angles. I could also say angle 1 and angle 5, angle 3 and angle 7, angle 4 and angle 8. Each of those sets are corresponding angles. Alternate interior angles. So when we think about alternate and interior, alternate go back and forth, interior, inside angles. So alternate interior angles are non-adjacent angles. That means they're not right next to each other, that lie on opposite sides of the transversal and between lines M and N. An example of that would be angles 4 and angle 5. Angle 4 and angle 5 are alternate interior angles. They're on the inside, in between those two lines along the transversal, but they're on opposite sides of the transversal, okay? That's why they're called alternate. So what do you think alternate exterior angles are? Alternate exterior angles are non-adjacent angles, so they're not right next to one another, that lie on opposite sides of the transversal and outside lines M and N. Angle 1 and angle 8 are alternate exterior angles. Those are on opposite sides of the transversal and they're on the outside of lines M and N. Another set would be what? Angle 2 and angle 7. Those are also alternate exterior angles. So now let's move on to our last vocabulary term, same side interior angles. What do you think that might be? Those are angles that lie on the same side of the transversal, T, and between lines M and N. These are also called consecutive interior angles. And you might see either same side interior angles or consecutive interior angles, and they mean the same thing. So same side interior angles, an example would be angle 3 and angle 5. Those are same side interior angles. What's another set of same side interior angles? Angle 4 and angle 6. And so you can see that I have abbreviated a lot of these terms, and you can do that whenever we get into proofs and stuff like that. Just any kind of reasoning where you have to justify it with like the vocabulary term or the theorem or the postulate. So you can say, alternate interior angles. Okay, you can abbreviate it. Okay, let's move on. So in examples 1 through 4, we're going to classify some pairs of lines and planes. So in number 1, it says name a pair of skew segments. So we're just going to practice identifying, all right? And, since we're doing this together, all of our answers are going to look the same, but when you get into your independent practice, answers may vary. So a pair of skew segments, segment EH and segment GC are skew. They're not coplanar, they do not intersect, okay? And they're not parallel. Name a pair of parallel segments. Parallel segments are coplanar and they do not intersect. So an example of that would be segment AE is parallel to segment BF. Number 3, name a pair of perpendicular segments. They intersect to form 90-degree angles. An example of that would be segment AE is perpendicular to segment AB. And I know that, I can't ever assume, but I know that because I have this little box over here in the corner that lets me know that's a 90-degree angle. Number 4, name a pair of parallel planes. An example of that would be plane ABE is parallel to plane CDG. Okay, and I just picked 3 points, C, D, and G, back there to name that plane. But I only need 3 points and I can write it in any order. So now let's move on to classifying pairs of angles. So here, obviously, I have 2 lines right here, and I have this transversal C. How do I know that that's the transversal? I know it because this is the line that intersects these other two lines. All 8 angles are along that transversal. Name a pair of corresponding angles. A pair of corresponding angles might be angle 1 and angle 5. But you could also say angle 3 and angle 7 are corresponding. Angle 2 and angle 6. Angle 4 and angle 8. Number 6, name a pair of alternate exterior angles. So I'm looking at the angles that are formed that are on the outside of lines A and B. They're exterior along this transversal. Alternate, they're on opposite sides. So an example of that would be angle 1 and angle 8. Those are alternate on opposite sides, exterior on the outside of those other lines. Number 7, name a pair of alternate interior angles. Now we're looking at opposite sides of the transversal, but these angles that are on the inside of those lines. What's an example of that? Angle 4 and angle 5 are alternate interior angles. Could I have said angle 3 and angle 6? Sure, those are also alternate interior angles. Number 8, name a pair of same side interior angles, also called consecutive interior angles. An example of that could be angle 4 and angle 6. They're on the same side of the transversal, and they're in between lines A and B. What's another example of some same side interior angles? Could I have said angle 3 and angle 5? Sure. Let's move on. The next section says to identify the transversal and classify each angle pair. So it's important to remember that both angles that are mentioned, they're going to be along the same line. Whatever that line is, that's your transversal. So number 9 says angle 2 and angle 8. Angle 2 and angle 8 are both along this line. That's Y. So that makes your transversal line Y, and angle 2 and angle 8 are in between these other lines on opposite sides of that transversal. So your transversal is line Y, and those are identified as alternate interior angles. They're on opposite sides of that transversal on the inside of these other two lines. Angle 1 and angle 12. Angle 1 is here, angle 12 is here. They're both along this line. That makes line W the transversal. And since this angle is on this side of this line, this angle is on the same side of that line, those are corresponding angles. And I've abbreviated it like that. You don't have to abbreviate it, but you can write out corresponding angles. Angle 8 and angle 9. Okay, well, they're both along this line right here. That makes my transversal line X. They're on the same side of it, so obviously they're not alternate anything. They're same side, and they're in between these other two lines that transversal intersects. So the transversal is line X, and those are same side interior angles. Angle 2 and angle 11. Here's angle 2, and here's angle 11. They're both along this line right here. That makes my transversal what? Line W. Okay, which means line Y and line X are the other two lines, right? Angle 2 is on the outside of line Y. Angle 11 is on the outside of line X. They're on opposite sides of this transversal. So my transversal is line W, and those are alternate exterior angles. If you want, pause the video, do some shading if that helps with color. Whatever you need to help you visually see it. Our last two examples for this set of notes are to just sketch each scenario. So number 13 says, draw parallel lines Q and R. Well, parallel lines are lines that never intersect. So I could draw two lines just like this, Q and R. Number 14 says, draw lines N and O cut by transversal P. So remember, if it's a transversal, that's the line that's intersecting the other two lines. So here's an example of that. NO, and then P is my transversal. And that concludes your notes over classifying pairs of lines and angles. I hope it was helpful.